In this video, we are going to refactor our transaction endpoint so that it works with our new broadcast endpoint. So let's just start from scratch and delete what we already have inside of this transaction endpoint. Cool. So the only time that we are hitting this transaction endpoint is during the broadcast that takes place inside of our transaction broadcast endpoint. And when our transaction endpoint is being hit, we are sending along a new transaction as data. So when we receive this new transaction inside of our transaction endpoint, all we have to do is add it to the pending transactions array of whichever node received this call. So let's do that now. So let's say const new transaction equals rec.body. We say this because we are sending the new transaction to this endpoint as the entire rec body. Cool. So now we have the new transaction, and all we want to do is add it to our pending transactions array on whichever node receives this call. So we are going to use our new method, add transaction to pending transactions, in order to do this. So let's copy this, and down here we will simply say Bitcoin dot add transaction to pending transactions. And this method simply takes in the new transaction that we received at this endpoint. Now from this method, we get the index of the block in which this transaction will be added to. That's what's returned to us from this method. So let's save this block index in our endpoint. So we will say const block index equals the result of our method. Cool. And the final thing that we have to do is just send back a response. So we will say res.json, and we'll send back an object that has the note that says transaction will be added in block, and then we will do some string interpolation and use our block index variable. Cool. And that's it for our transaction endpoint. It's pretty straightforward. So real quick, let me just run through how both of these endpoints are working together. So now whenever we want to create a new transaction, we are going to hit our transaction broadcast endpoint. And we are going to send along the amount, sender, and recipient of that transaction, pretty much all the data for that transaction. The first thing that we're going to do in this endpoint is we create a new transaction, and then we simply push that new transaction into the pending transactions array of this node that received this call. The next thing that we have to do is broadcast that new transaction to all the other nodes inside of our network. And that's exactly what we do with this for loop right here. We broadcast the new transaction to all the other nodes in our network by hitting their /transaction endpoint. So on all the other nodes in our network, they will get a call to this endpoint. And with that call, they will receive the new transaction that was just created as data. With this new transaction, they're simply going to take it and push it into their pending transactions array that is present on their node. And then they're going to send back a response that says this endpoint was successful. And this process will take place on all of the nodes that are present inside of our network. Once all of those requests are completed successfully, we know that the broadcast is now complete, and we simply send back the note that the transaction was created and broadcast successfully. And that's it. From now on, that is how we will create a transaction on our decentralized blockchain network. It's pretty cool. In the next video, we will test these endpoints to make sure that they are working correctly. I'll see you there.